I know I'm only on one day a week. I get it. I'm gonna have to jump on GarageBand and start sawing something together. This is the House Bar Show. Wow, and a guitar note, and then progressive and all. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Hey, Hal, did you mean something like this?
This is the House Bar Show. Wow, and a guitar note, and then progressive and all. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Yes, it happens.
The Hal Sparks radio program, mega worldwide.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Welcome, everybody. Philip is joining us a little bit live from Lviv. You're currently still there? Yes. And then Johnny Million is with us, dead center, and there's a astronaut floating between them. That's all that matters. And then I will try and over the course of this center you a little bit better, Phil. But there you are. And first of all, how you doing?
I've had better weeks, Hal.
Yeah?
I won't lie.
Yeah.
I can't see myself.
Well, that's okay.
Even
You're fine. You are just fine.
You can see over my shoulder there. That's my buddy Pierre.
Mm-hmm.
And Pierre Zakrzewski was killed in a town outside of Kiev last Sunday, and he was a real good friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And still processing that.
Yeah.
But look. So anytime you hear people bitching about the mass media, and those of us who are out here doing our job as best we can, tell that to the wife of my friend Pierre.
Right.
We're doing the best we can, given the constraints of what corporate media is. So,
well, curiously enough, well, let's start with the. No. It's I completely get it. Because this is the reality that's going on there. I have had some rageful moments myself, as anybody who watches the live stream knows, about some of the more prominent non-corporate media people that you would say, specifically this week, Jimmy Dore and Russell Brand, who are doing everything in their power to excuse the actions of this. And so John Mersheimer is the father of the notion that this is the West's fault, that we drove Ukraine to this, that Putin had no other choice, and that he's sort of an innocent victim in this. And Mersheimer saying, I warned you guys about this a while back, because the warning ultimately was, don't push Putin, just let him have whatever he wants. Ukraine does not have the right to self-determination. Ukraine does not have the right to defend themselves, and they certainly don't have the right to join NATO. Now, I have covered multiple times, beyond all this nonsense, about the conversation in 1990 between Baker and Gorbachev about East Berlin and the non-movement into the rest of Germany.
Yeah, and the Budapest Agreement.
Right. And the predetermination, that they made as the USSR, that we weren't going to push NATO troops into the other part of Germany before German reunification. The USSR no longer exists. And I don't care. I don't think anybody has to care that the man running the place is a former KGB agent, and he thinks it still should. That's not my concern, nor it should be the concern of anyone in Ukraine. And in 1997, NATO and Russia signed an agreement, the foundation agreement, that said that every one of these countries, from Georgia, which they later invaded, and Ukraine, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, all these had the right to self-determination and the right to determine the best course of action for their own defense, whether that includes joining NATO or not. Period. End of story. A written, not a verbal agreement that they were yammering about maybe in a couple meetings, but a direct, on paper, treaty.
On paper agreement. And what Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all those numbnuts who advocate for Well, we have to understand what Moscow is saying. I mean, we have to understand their concerns. I mean, wouldn't you have those concerns? And look at what happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis. They put
Right.
missiles right on our doorstep, and yeah, okay, fine, all legit. Well, not legitimate, but oh yes, they do have those concerns. But here's the converse argument for that. So what? We're supposed to just to agree to 40 plus million people in Ukraine alone, much less the millions of people in the Baltic states or Georgia or Azerbaijan or Armenia or the Central Asian states.
Right.
Screw them.
Right.
Screw them. Screw that their interests are. Moscow wants its buffer zone.
Right.
So screw those people.
That's right.
That's what those people are advocating, and it's deplorable. Listen, Hal, I am so glad that we have this opportunity weekly, and I know you were traveling this week, so we couldn't do what we kind of proposed at one point, kind of a midweek check-in. So I have a lot to kind of download here.
Catch us up.
Apologies, rants are coming.
Understood.
Okay, so the argument is that screw these satellite states because Moscow's scared and we should just be at the whim of Moscow. We are at an inflection point, and I want all of your audience to hear what I'm saying here. We are basically at a point where we have to decide whether or not what Russia sees the world as is the way the world should operate, or the way that Western democracies believe the world should work at. And it really, the problem is that Russia has a darn good argument in that the rule of law is often broken on a global stage. But you look at yourself, Russia, before they know us very well, and they attack us with the clubs that they know we will most be vulnerable to. And so they say, you Americans, you adhere to an ideal of a rule of law, but you break it all the time. And yet at home, they don't have the rule of law themselves, so they know what they're doing. I have posted many times in the last week, Hal, and I think I sent directly to you a quote by Abraham Lincoln. And I think I even mentioned it in last week's discussion, was that Lincoln said, look, we're full of hypocrites. We say that we believe in the rule of law, and yet at the same time we betray our ideals of, we take as a truth these inalienable rights that we're given. And if we're not going to at least aspire to that, then screw it. Let's just be Russia and just not even have a pretext for the idea of.
I will say, in reference to that, that was meant as
Sorry.
Yes,
yours,
that's okay.
Clear.
The Abe Lincoln quote, which makes its way around, especially these days, and Russia and other countries are fond of kind of bringing that one up when it floats, is based on a verbal irony. It was meant to be provocative to the very people that were trying to divide the country. If you don't want freedom for everybody, why don't you just finally admit that that's what you want? It was meant to be it wasn't him arguing his real beliefs. It was him telling the Confederacy, what are you really arguing for? You're arguing for the reinstatement of a monarchy, effectively, where there are magic families and special people. And it was not meant as an earnest statement. We have to take a break. When we come back, Philip will have yet another rant, I have no doubt. But then on top of that, that statement was also made when Lincoln was in the process of moving this country forward towards its values in an exponential way, in a way that caused the death of hundreds of thousands of Americans in the process, and yet was viewed as a price worth paying. That is wholly different than Ukraine and Russia are one people, and basically us taking their land. They don't deserve the right to their own government. We'll be back.
Sorry.
I'm only on one day a week. I get it. I'm going to have to jump on garage band and start sawing something together. This is the House Bar Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive and all. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Hey, Hal, did you mean something like this?
This is the House Bar Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive and all. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
The Hal Sparks radio program, mega worldwide.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Welcome back. Philip Bittner is joining us. Philip, are you still with us? Can we hear you?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can't. Your camera's on frozen again, but that's just part of where we
I'll
are.
try to fix that.
Okay, Philip is with us live from Lviv in Ukraine, and has been gentleman enough to join us in the middle of that. Obviously, there's the broader geopolitical stuff, and then there's the stuff that's happening straight on the ground. Oh, he hung up and called back. Excellent. Okay, we'll call him back. We'll take this guy out. And there he is. Okay, good. You're back.
Okay. Sorry, I heard you.
That's okay. So in this, let's start with the material time on the ground. What's going on in Lviv right now? Because the Russian column has been stalled going into Kiev for, the entire time, for 3 weeks now. This was, can you imagine something that is, they've been 40 miles away from a place for, the better part of these last 2.5 weeks, which is incredible considering the size of the alleged size of the Russian force, which is another conversation entirely, and what the Ukrainians are fighting with, and the fact that they're dealing with this on the ground. So I know they're evacuating people right now, and I also know that that's part of Russia's plan, because what you can do with this kind of straight bombing is you can drive people out. You can make people, if you can. Effectively, there's genocide for wiping out a group of people, and then you can also evacuate them from the area, claim the ground because the people are no longer there. I don't think that's going to work in this idea, and most of the people that are leaving are women, children, and the elderly, people who aren't fighting age, aren't fighting size, aren't being able to contribute in the battles themselves. So they're not planning to leave forever. They're planning on coming back as soon as this is over. So it's different than what I think Ukraine expected. Beg your pardon. What Russia expected when they went in Georgia.
Well, Al, this goes back to a very fundamental principle about what's happening here, is that they don't think this is a country. They don't recognize the Russian. They really don't. They don't recognize Ukraine as a sovereign state. They think that they are and they do this with so many of their different satellite states. The Serbs seem to actually appreciate it and benefit from it because, of course, the Balkans is a different situation. But, the Serbs are a perfect example of how a kind of a subservient Slavic nation. It wasn't always like that under Tito, but, they have gotten to a point where they are actually perfectly happy to have Russia as their big brother. The Ukrainians, by contrast, from a long time ago and with a very different history than Serbia, have gotten to a point where this is going. I was researching this earlier today, getting deeper and deeper into the Ukrainian independence movement that's been happening since literally the 1600s. And whether they were fighting the Poles or the Russians or the Germans or whatever, this ground has always been contested by bigger powers, except for the actual people who live here.
Right.
So I am getting this stuff from people who are saying, "Oh, you're so brave," or "You're so the information you're giving is so important." I feel extremely privileged. I feel I am witnessing the birth of a nation. And if you as an American do not see how frickin' amazing that is,
Yeah.
That they are fighting against powers that have been bigger than them for centuries. This land has been overrun by powers bigger than them for the last 400 years at least. And
Right.
they are finally coming to a place where they're going to say, no, we're a country, we have borders, we have a national identity, this is who we are. There's a rule of law on the global stage, and we will fight and we will die for it. And my God, it's inspiring.
Yeah.
I'm not scared at all. I get air raid sirens every couple of hours. I would
Right.
not be terribly surprised if I hear one while we're talking.
Yeah. Well,
Yesterday, we
yeah,
were
go ahead.
struck. We were struck outside, about 4 miles from where I am, was hit by a multitude of ordnance coming from the Russians in the Black Sea Fleet. They hit an airfield, an air
Strip. Yep.
repair site.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there is still a sense, though, here that they can hit us with whatever they want to hit us with. We're going to be a state. We're going to be a nation.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's incredibly inspiring. I find it an incredible privilege to be here.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the mistakes, the biggest mistakes, and that might be why. I hope you're all right there, Phil.
I get on a rant, my throat gets dry.
I understand. No. So we got these reports that Russia has pulled back two of their put under house arrest two of their intelligence officers, and largely because apparently they were telling Putin that this was going to be easy, that the Ukrainian people were going to like this, in the same way that they were more than likely telling him this stuff that he was believing about Crimea and Donbass, which is, the people there love us being there. They would rather be with us, even though what he's talking about is the people that they put there, the people that they sent in, because they've been brooming Ukrainians out of those areas over the last 10 years. That's been the process. And then they've been trying to, add more people from Russia into the extended areas. The problem is they haven't spent the time making their lives better. They're basically just there to absorb, missile fire or gunshots and throw themselves in front of this so that Russia can go, look how terribly they're being treated. So it looks like, it seems to me anyways, that the story that got back to Vladimir Putin was that the Donbass and Crimea is full of people who wish Ukraine was part of Russia, and the rest of Ukraine feels this way too. It's just this government and the West that's BS them into thinking that they can survive on their own without me. And it's like
that performance today. That performance today says it all. I mean, if that was not a Nazi rally style event, then I don't know what was.
Yeah, it was like white nationalist Olympics. It was like the flags and all that kind of stuff. And yet at the same time, they had to oblige a lot of people to go. There were a lot of people who were talking to reporters there who didn't want to show their faces and say who they were or where they were from, because they were afraid that what they said would get back to Putin and them. But they were literally like talking to reporters while putting their hands over their face and going, I don't support this war. So you can't even see their mouths moving. And, again, huge kudos to the Russian people that are protesting this because of what happens to you when you're protesting. And in contrast to these idiot truckers who think a blockade is a protest and think that they can, mess around or say that Justin Trudeau is acting in a tyrannical way and that is in any way comparable to what Vladimir Putin is doing. So here's, the story apparently that he was told was that that the Ukrainians didn't really want sovereignty, didn't believe in this, and that it was being forced on them. Almost like into the beliefs around Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places, that the West is trying to force democracy on places that are culturally incapable or unwilling to do so.
It's the cynicism of the Russian system. Mm-hmm. Okay, I go back to this. I go back to this point that I keep making, but it really is like there is a worldview that is being put forward by Vladimir Putin and his regime, that stop pretending that there is such a thing as individual motivation or individual destiny, or that there are people who actually want to control their own future. You are all pawns. You are all it. I've been thinking about so much of what I wanted to say today, and I one of the things that I wanted to make a point of is that there's remember how last week I said that one of my fundamental when I consider the differences between America and Russia, how we're kind of a dark mirror to one another.
Right.
And how they fought their way out of nature and we fought our way into it. We look at the world in an optimistic view and they look at the world as the wolf is at the door. There's another fundamental difference between Russia and America. And that is this. We believe in the idea that we are born with certain inalienable rights.
Right.
That could not be farther than what the Russian perspective is on of what it is to be human, and they don't believe in inalienable rights. They believe in the idea that you are born naked into this world and you gotta fight every single day to earn whatever right you're going to get. It's good. It's because you fight like a demon. And if you really want to have power, you have to take power from somebody else. It's a zero-sum equation. That's the perspective on power. And that is why also there is a massive, there is this huge populace in Russia, which is there's no middle class, because basically the idea is if you want rights, you fight for them and you earn them.
Yes.
Whereas Americans and in Western society, we go from a baseline of you're born with these rights and that's given to you, and then we move from there. And the problem is, I don't know who's right or who's wrong, but as an American, I tend to lean on the fact, on the idea of, you know, I'll
tell you what, we have to take
rights. We have rights.
I
will
will
have to agree on that, and we move forward from there.
Right. We got to take a break. When we come back, I'll tell you exactly who's right. I promise. How do you like that for a bumper?
Agree with you, I bet.
That's I don't doubt it. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide, with now with 100% more. Johnny Million and Philip Ittner joining us from Lviv. We'll be back right after this.
You want more, Hal? We'll give you more. Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820. Hoo-yah!
Welcome back to the show. Philip Ittner is still with us from Lviv, and we're so glad that he is. Johnny Million is fresh from a half marathon, which is a whole marathon that he does on one leg. And I'm at... seriously. And he just did a half marathon.
As we say in this part of the world, Molodets.
Molodets. Yeah.
You're welcome.
And I'm in Kentucky on my kids' spring break, spending it with the grandparents, because my father, being a hypochondriac, is always believing he's not long for this world and wants to see more of his grandkid. And so that's what you do.
Aww.
You just do it. So here we are, and it's lovely. And here's the question we went to before was, the Russians believe that you don't have any inborn rights. You have to fight for every scrap you get in life. And the Americans believe we are born with these inalienable rights, and they are, the gift of God to every person. This is the essential premise of the Constitution, for example. Now, people will forget that those inalienable rights were the root purpose of the fighting. That these are mine already, these are yours already, and we are fighting together. Whether we agree on a bunch of stuff or not, you have the right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to congregate, all the elements of that we appreciate in the Constitution are what the Revolutionary War was fought for. We Americans believe that fighting was necessary as well. We just did it a long time ago and then continue to build a system on top of it. The Russians have been dealing their entire lives with three versions of dictatorships. The USSR as a communist state is nonsense. It was always a dictatorship. It was, socialism is a functioning, governmental system that was eventually supposed to lead them to full communism. But the dictators in charge never really wanted that, nor would they. And that's one of the reasons why communism is a non-starter, is because every leader who's on their way there gets to a really sweet spot where they control everything and never want to give it up, which is essentially how you get monarchs. And so they went from the czars to the USSR to Vladimir Putin, with a mild break of Gorbachev in between that was pretty sweet in terms of the sales of rock and roll music and jeans in the country. Yeltsin a bit too, yes. And in that period, they had an 8-year period where they could kind of balance that idea that, oh, maybe we could start this up, and then it got squashed. Just like democracy gets squashed by authoritarians and dictators throughout history when it starts to gain ground. The United States was the biggest gaining of ground of democracy in world history, and was the seed point for other democracies. Ukraine was in a similar situation. Russia tried the exact same thing with them, with Yanukovych effectively, we'll let you exist, but you're really a sock puppet for us. Poroshenko was a bridge to Zelensky, and Zelensky's their first legitimate leader. And in the same way that America had 9 presidents before George Washington. I don't know if Peyton Randolph was the first president of the United States, but not under the Constitution. George Washington was the first president of the United States under the U.S. Constitution. We had 9 presiding presidents before that.
Right.
Peyton Randolph was the first guy to...
Constitution before the one we ratified
Exactly.
in 1789.
That's right. That period lasted for years, and it had a lot of King George's agents and other people trying to undermine it. They had people that were leaned towards the crown, and people who were fully wanting to be with the crown, and people who fully wanted to be revolutionaries, and there was a batch back and forth. And so we had in the United States in 1772 on, we had our Yanukovych to Poroshenko to Zelensky moment. Yeah. We had it.
Right.
And we did. And once we put that fight in the rearview mirror, we in a lot of ways, even as rough as it's been in patches, have effectively just marched up that hill towards bettering our democracy ever since. Shedding monarchy, shedding slavery, shedding all the old world stuff that was part of this. And what you're seeing in many ways in Ukraine, and this is, is you're seeing that in a shorter time. In the same way that women's suffrage in the world took hundreds of years, and gay rights truncated to a much shorter amount of time because of modern life and the ability towards messaging and all the other accoutrements that come with it. Ukraine is benefiting from the same level. A more intense war, a more intense propaganda fight, a more intense messaging fight worldwide, and more worldwide attention because of communication, just because of satellites.
But
in a way,
But also how there's a couple of things that are happening here that are actually unique for this particular part of the world.
Sure.
Is that they have been fighting for centuries for actually an ideal that is very similar to what the ideals that we eventually, and when we talk about what eventually became the United States and the prior presidents and the governance of what was colonial America, which actually did become a viable society independent of itself, and which ultimately led to the revolution that in 1776, and then of course the creation of the modern United States of America from our founding fathers. This plot of land in Europe has actually been a place of representational democracy since the 1400s, 1500s, and which actually eventually did become, the Cossacks. There's an entirely, it's like what the Scots are to the Brits. There is a sub-nation within this stretch of land of the Cossacks, and the hegemite of the Don Cossacks in particular, where they actually did have not a representative democracy. They had a full-fledged democracy, which is why it was so darn chaotic
Yeah.
is because everybody had a vote.
Yeah.
Every single member of the Cossack clans had a vote. And they would hold these massive, of course, back in those days, the population was smaller, but still, they had direct democracy as opposed to
Right.
representative democracy
And it
here.
got
It was so revolutionary that the Poles and the Russians equally decided that they wanted to
squash
crush
it.
these people.
Right. That
And
my
so,
point.
as
My
the
point
lesser
exactly.
of two
Like
evils,
it would start flourishing, and then it would get knocked down. It would get flourishing and knocked down. And one of the reasons why it survived in the United States was why the United States survived as it did was because of its isolation geographically. While it got to grow, it got the space away from it instead of being punching distance from the nearest psychopath. And that's currently the opposite is now becoming true in that dictatorships are now in punching distance from a multitude of democracies that are thriving and creating opportunities for themselves that have nothing to do with geopolitical war. That the world effectively over time is trying to shake off the old world resource wars that defined both borders and movements of peoples over centuries. And everybody's like, no, these are our lines now. We're okay with that. And we'll just build what we build culturally within those things and see what we can contribute to the world. Instead of, I'm born on the gold, you're born on the oil, they have the arable land, let's fight. And that's still the mentality of Russia and China largely. Except they have no arable land, and we don't care about the oil and coal as much as we used to. And that's going to just increase over the next 2 decades as much as they try to fight it. So Ukraine,
and for the first time, for the first time since the 17th century, these people actually have a functioning state with borders, and they're not going to give it up. Not this time.
So I'm curious. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a reality where Crimea and Donbass end up back in Ukrainian hands after all this.
If you'd have said that to me 8 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. But I actually think they might get momentum so much that they might actually be able to. Crimea is going to be difficult. And we've discussed that because it is a very serious loss for the Russians. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a tough fight to try and get back Crimea.
But it's also a small price to pay for your entire economy coming back.
How close are you to break?
We've got 2 minutes.
Oh, you got 2 minutes? Plenty of time. Okay. You can let me go. Here I go. Okay, so Crimea, we've talked about it. It's an existential threat because that's where Russia has its Black Sea Fleet. Black Sea Fleet is the only fleet of 4 fleets, and we've discussed that. The fact that Russia's navy is too big for itself and for its purposes currently, although I have argued with you, Hal, that once the Northeast Passage thaws and there is a functioning trade route over the Arctic, and Russia will control that, and it will make the Panama Canal look like a Korean bodega. And I argue that they do need a good navy, and that's an existential threat for them. But they need to have a special status for Sevastopol, and I think we are misreading these arguments that are coming out of the negotiations for peace, that there is a special status agreement being determined for Ukraine. Some people have speculated that it's kind of like an Austria situation where they're part of the EU but not part of NATO. I think there's a possibility that actually that the communications that are coming out of both Russia and Ukraine when it comes to a special status agreement would be over Crimea. The Ukrainians are not, the Ukrainian government is not delusional. They understand that for Russia, Sevastopol is an existential threat. Many Ukrainians will tell you they want Crimea back for a variety of reasons, not least of which because of the Tatar community that is there. But ultimately, I don't think that's not the hill that Ukraine is willing to die on.
I agree. I don't think
get their independence with a special status for the Black Sea Fleet. If they're smart, and I bet they are, and in fact I know they are because I know several of them, they will begrudgingly do it.
Right. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. More from
got
Phil
like 2
and
minutes.
Lviv. Yep, exactly. Well done. We'll be back right after this with more of your comments also in the chat. If anybody has a question for Phil, Johnny will gladly keep track of those and feed them to him. We'll be back right
Please,
after this.
questions.
Yep.